What's up, everybody? It's Roman Gaming here. So this is going to be my very first attempt at doing a movie review. It's not just going to be for a movie, but of course for Star Wars The Last Jedi, which is pretty much one of the biggest releases of the year, of course. I think, before I really get into this, and let me really quickly tell you that the biggest part of this review will actually be spoiler free. At the end of it, I'll let you know in advance, when I'm gonna dive into some spoiler stuff that I wanted to point out. So if you haven't watched the movie by any chance yet, then you can pretty much tune out then, I guess, and watch it for yourself and then maybe come back. But for the record, I thought it would be, it would kind of be required to tell you about my mindset going into this movie, my connection with the Star Wars franchise, because that's the thing. I don't really, I've never really been a fan of Star Wars necessarily. In fact, I actually started watching the original trilogy, episode 4, 5, and 6, just a couple months before The Force Awakens came out in 2015. So that was my first experience with the franchise, really. And at that point, of course, those movies are 30 or 40 years old or whatever. So, while I did enjoy them for what they were, because they, already were so outdated, and simply for the fact that I didn't really grow up with the franchise, like I said, I enjoyed them, but it wasn't this thing where I now absolutely couldn't wait for The Force Awakens to come out. Force Awakens did, of course, release that year, 2015. I watched it, and while right now in retrospect, I guess, I hear a lot of people complain that the movie was pretty much A New Hope repeated, right? I actually really enjoyed it for what it was, with simply with it being more up to date for, of course, today's standards and stuff, and the way it looks and stuff. But at the same time, I thought it did have some really cool, memorable moments, like how it starts off in Jakku and they find the Millennium Falcon, which Rey points out, oh no, it's just trash. Then they find the ship. Han Solo being introduced. Of course, Han Solo's death was pretty huge and stuff. That scene was done super well. The fight in the snow. I thought that the movie had some really memorable moments, and it definitely got me more into the franchise. And so I'm not gonna lie, I was kind of excited to go into Star Wars The Last Jedi. So let's actually start talking about that movie, right? I just saw it a couple of days ago, and I walked away a little mixed. And of course, there has been a lot of controversy by the fans, because a lot of fans actually seem very mixed on how they feel about the movie. And I can totally understand that, because don't get me wrong, I enjoyed myself with the movie, and I thought obviously that it was very well made with huge production values and stuff. But at the same time, it didn't really blow me away, and it kind of went against expectations. And I don't mean that in the way that the movie took some very surprising twists and turns that you totally hadn't seen coming, but I rather just mean that it didn't exceed or it didn't really live up to my expectations in the way that it felt surprisingly weird, out of place at times, and just kind of average for what I expected this movie to be, if I can be really honest with you. So I just thought it was kind of just all right. I didn't necessarily love it. I didn't hate it either. It's just it was whatever, like I said, to me. So to my side, I've got some notes here, if you see me looking here, because obviously, I gotta remember all this stuff. I'm not gonna be able to do that out of the top of my head. But let's talk a tiny bit about the good things first about the movie, right? Well, the good things really comes down simply to, once again, the production values. This movie looks absolutely spectacular, and that is obvious because they put so much money into it. You kind of expect it to. Just looking at the certain fights that they have, the spectacle, the effects, it's absolutely it's breathtaking at times. I think I can talk about this because it's in a trailer, but you see in one of the trailers that there's this salt planet that they go to, which is actually completely red, but it's covered in salt, so white on the outside, right? And because of that, for example, when they have that fight, you just see a mix of different colors splashing all over the screen. It's insane. Some of the space fights that they have are just ridiculous in spectacle. Once again, sound effects are of course top notch. The soundtrack itself is awesome. So overall, just purely as far as the visuals goes and stuff, it really can get much better than this right now, right? So that was definitely something that blew me away. Also, the movie, while, like I said, in general, it's not super memorable or something. It does have a couple of iconic scenes that will certainly stay with me. Not as many as I thought The Force Awakens did, personally speaking, but at the same time, yeah, there are some that I'm definitely going to be remembering for a while. Overall, I thought actually that the first half started off a little slow and stuff, because of course, and this is not a spoiler, because this is literally how The Force Awakens ends, you know that Rey is going to end up at, Luke Skywalker, his place on the island, right? So, they're gonna have some type of training going on, and there's a lot of those scenes kind of similar to like the scenes that Luke had with Yoda and like what was it, Empire Strikes Back, right? Very similar to that in a way, I thought. So like I said, first half is kind of slow, second half is lots of fighting and just insanely spectacular pretty much. So that's really where the pacing picks up. Now let's actually talk about some of the bad points in the movie for me personally, right? I gotta kick things off really with the biggest complaint that I kind of have is that The Force Awakens just set up certain storylines, and I can't really go into it too well because I'd be spoiling which ones exactly that I'm talking about here. But it set up certain storylines, right? And I really noticed with The Last Jedi that it just leaves a lot of it kind of untouched and unanswered, and it just decides to go into a different direction that you totally do not see coming. And sometimes that works out well, and sometimes it just doesn't, because it feels like, well, the first movie was supposed to set up this trilogy, and it's just a little weird that the second movie, which is of course directed and written by a completely different guy, that it doesn't really go into those those details and stuff, right? Because you expect really those questions to be answered. So I thought that was a little weird. Also, and this may not be a very, I may get some hate for saying this, but basically, I'm not a huge fan, for example, of superhero movies, right? Basically because I feel like there's never really anything at stake, and at the same time, anything can really happen. Like, in a superhero movie, you can see a guy get completely beaten up to the point where he would pretty much be dead at that point, right? But he still isn't, And I kind of felt with The Last Jedi that they took the Force, which is of course what Star Wars is all about, they took it too far. Basically, it created these powers that all of a sudden, where at first you think that a character is dead, turns out, no, that's not the case, or injured or whatever. There's just a lot of those type of moments where it does something completely different to what you expect, and when that happens, I just don't feel the tension anymore of like, well, I see somebody clearly, for example, just an example, not to spoil anything, I see somebody get hit by a what's it called, let's just say by a blaster or whatever. You think he's dead. No, he's not. It's because he has the Force or whatever, right? Like, just those type of scenarios that pull me out of the experience a little bit. And I thought that was that was just a little disappointing for me personally to see. There is a new kind of character that they introduce that literally seems to like become a part of the new trio of characters that we have, right? Rey, Finn, and Poe. There's a new one they introduce all of a sudden out of nowhere in this one, and the storyline there is definitely a little unnecessary and just, unneeded, really. That's what it comes down to. Some people complained that, for example, there are some, a lot of humoristic scenes, a lot of jokes being made and stuff, and they found it a bit too out of place. I didn't have too much of an issue with that personally. I thought that the humor, was like pretty alright. There's a couple of like, scenes that come across as a little out of place, but it didn't overall bother me too much. And last of all, this is a very specific complaint that I have, but I haven't really seen too many people complain about this, because usually people love the music in these movies, but I really felt that while, nearing the end of the movie, man, they were playing that same Star Wars theme for like the 72nd time. It was absolutely insane. They just kept repeating it over and over and over just for scenes to make more of an impact, I guess. And that just kind of started bothering me at some point. But maybe that's a little nitpicky. So overall, as you can see, there are quite a lot of things that you can complain about with this movie. And that's just my thing. I walked away with a bit of a strange feeling of like, well, what I watched was pretty cool, but at the same time, just not on the same standard that I would have expected from this movie, especially, after even rewatching The Force Awakens, which I did personally, actually like enjoy a lot, and I thought it was quite a memorable movie. This one is not so much that. It feels like it's rather just there, and I guess ultimately, especially something that kind of bothers me about it is the fact that this is supposed to be a trilogy, so the next movie that we're gonna get in this trilogy is the last one, right? And it doesn't feel, after finishing The Last Jedi, like they're setting up, some awesome final epic conclusion or something. It rather just feels like, oh yeah, this is its own separate episode, and we'll see you again in 2 years for another adventure. That's just like, that's just a few gripes that I personally really had with it. And yeah, overall, that's, like, it's not, I can't really recommend the movie to people, because I feel like, if you've watched The Force Awakens and you want to see how it continues, you're gonna watch The Last Jedi. It's really that simple. And if you don't care for Star Wars, or you didn't care for watching The Force Awakens, then why would you check it out now? You know what I mean? So I think it is still worth a watch for sure. But I just don't think it's like that amazing, or that this one stood out in particular as much. So that's pretty much it for the non-spoiler part, and we've already been going for like 10 minutes or something, I think. Now let's actually dive into, a few spoilers. It's not going to be too much. So if you have not watched the movie, then make sure you stop watching the video, I guess, unless you don't care. Basically, what I was, of course, talking about with, like, the stupid use of the Force in a way is obviously with Leia's death, which they kind of seem to fake, which kind of seems like that's what's happening. Of course, we know that Carrie Fisher passed away, so it was kind of like, some people were really expecting that they were somehow gonna make Leia's character, I guess, also die in the movie, right? And we see this explosion happen that takes her into space and stuff, and you think she's dead at that point, but it turns out that wasn't the case, because she could use the Force and get back into a ship. And I thought it was just kind of too over the top, for what I really want this movie to be, because at most of the time it is so not realistic, but it's so, like, tense, and it feels real, you know what I mean? Second of all, of course, this is not a huge scene, but you have Luke Skywalker's death, which I completely did not see coming, because not only does he use this, like, he uses his Force powers or whatever to kind of teleport an alternate version of himself, or however you want to say it, a hologram or something. He teleports that to the Salt Planet to confront Kylo Ren, of course, and give the others a chance to escape. So at first you think, like, well, good job, he actually did that, right? So he made them able to escape while kind of surprising Kylo Ren in that way. But then turns out when you go back to the island, I guess, and see what's actually happening to Luke, it was too much for him, and he just, disappears out of nowhere. It feels like a kind of anticlimactic death to such what to many people is a very iconic character, right? So I thought that was just, definitely a little weird. And so all the Force stuff in this movie, I just thought it was a bit too much, personally. Like I said, there are some amazing moments, though, that I did think were memorable, that I just talked about. Obviously, the throne room sequence where Snoke gets killed. The way they do that in a very surprising way, where Kylo Ren pretty much slashes him in half, went completely against expectations, because this is once again a thing I pointed out, is that they really seem to do a lot of setup work in The Force Awakens, where you thought Snoke was going to be like the ultimate bad guy or whatever, because they really kept teasing him in that way. Now you finally saw him revealed, but he also met his demise in the movie. So, that's another thing where, it was surprising, but it felt a little weird, because you just thought that's what the storyline was clearly going to be. But Rian Johnson, who directed the movie, it seemed like it just felt like, yeah, whatever, we're just going to get rid of that, and that in that way, like I said, that was definitely quite an interesting point. Speaking about Snoke, of course, one thing you could point out is that a lot of people were speculating about his backstory, what that was going to be, and the movie didn't really bother explaining that at all, and I wonder if they're still going to do it, because now that he's dead, he's pretty much irrelevant to this trilogy, so I wonder what's going to happen there. I doubt that we're ever really going to hear much about it. Yeah, and last of all, another amazing moment that it definitely had was the whole Luke Skywalker versus Kylo Ren fight that I was talking about. The way it does that on the Salt Planet, where you see them like on, opposite sides of the screen and stuff, definitely looks stunning, and it was all in all a very, very memorable moment. That I think I'm gonna remember for quite a while to come. So this is pretty much, how I felt about the movie. I hope I kind of, pointed out like everything well, and this is my very first movie review ever, so I'm not really gonna give it a score, whatever. I've kind of stopped doing that for reviews, but I think I pointed out well enough what the pros and the cons are for you to be able to make up your own mind about, you know, how I feel about this movie and if you should watch it if you have not done so already. But I'm gonna assume that you actually did, because you actually came to the spoiler part, right? So yeah, with that being said, I hope you all enjoyed this video. Thanks a lot for watching, everybody. Let me know if you would like me to do these type of videos more often. And then for now, thanks a lot for watching, and hope to see you again next time.